The rain in Brooklyn always smelled like wet concrete and broken promises. Tonight, it was pouring, drumming relentlessly against the thin glass of my living room window, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the roaring silence inside my chest. I stood frozen in the narrow, dimly lit hallway of our apartment. The air was thick, suffocatingly heavy, with the scent of expensive cigars, aged bourbon, and the oppressive, arrogant pheromones of several high society alphas. Hunter had brought his Wall Street friends over for drinks. I was supposed to be asleep in the bedroom, out of sight, exactly where proper quiet Omega belonged when the real men were talking business. But the thirst had driven me out of bed, and now my bare feet were rooted to the cold hardwood floor just inches from the living room door. So Vance? A voice slurred slightly. It sounded like his VP, a notoriously toxic alpha named Carter. When are you going to stop playing house in this cramped Brooklyn shoebox? You are the heir to the Vance empire, for God's sake. It is time to ditch the domestic act and get back to the city. I held my breath, waiting for Hunter's deep, familiar voice to defend our home. To defend me. Instead, a low, bitter chuckle vibrated through the thin walls. It was a sound I had heard before, but never directed at our life together. It is not that simple, Carter. Hunter's voice drifted out sharp and dismissive. I never wanted to be tied down. You all know that. I value my freedom more than anything. Then why the hell did you bond with him? Another voice chimed in, followed by a chorus of knowing laughs. A painful beat of silence stretched between us. My hand instinctively drifted down, resting protectively over the slight 3-month swell of my stomach, hidden beneath my oversized cashmere sweater. Tell them, Hunter, I pleaded silently. Tell them you love me. Honestly, the bond just happened. Hunter said, his tone dripping with a casual indifference that felt like a physical blow to my throat. I was in rut, he was in heat, and we lost control. He was just a mistake, an accident of biology. And now I am stuck with this for life. Stuck, a mistake, an accident. The words echoed in my ears, drowning out the sound of the rain, the clinking of their crystal glasses, and the shattering of my own heart. The silver bond mark on my neck, a mark I had traced every night, foolishly believing it was a symbol of our eternal devotion, suddenly burned like a toxic brand. He did not love me. He was just playing a role, waiting for an escape route from a prison he felt I had trapped him in. I did not burst into the room. I did not scream or cry. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal numbed me completely. I quietly backed away my bare feet, making no sound, and retreated into the dark sanctuary of our bedroom. The decision was not born out of sudden anger, but out of a deep, exhausting clarity. I was 23, pregnant, and fiercely protective of the tiny, fluttering heartbeat inside me. My child, my son, as the doctor had suspected just yesterday, was not going to grow up in a house where his father viewed his existence as a biological trap. If Hunter Vance wanted his freedom, I was going to give it to him. Tonight. I pulled my old battered leather suitcase from the back of the closet. I did not take the expensive watches or the designer clothes he had bought me to make me look presentable at his corporate galas. I only packed what was truly mine, a few comfortable sweaters, my journals, my favorite worn-out jeans, and my pride. My entire life compressed into one small bag in less than 15 minutes. Before leaving the bedroom, I walked into the adjoining bathroom and stared at my reflection. Pale skin, blonde hair tousled from sleep, and blue eyes that looked far older than they had 6 months ago. I placed a hand over my stomach and took a shaky breath. "It is just you and me now, little guy." I whispered, the first tear finally breaking free and tracing a hot path down my cold cheek. "I have got you. I promise." I zipped the suitcase and walked out to the small kitchen, completely bypassing the living room, where the laughter was still booming. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the glossy black and white printout from the clinic. The ultrasound. A tiny, perfect little peanut curled in the darkness. My hands trembled as I placed it directly on the marble island right next to Hunter's expensive espresso machine, where he would undoubtedly find it tomorrow morning. I did not write a dramatic letter. I did not leave a desperate plea. The image was enough. It was my final statement. This is what you lost. I slipped on my heavy trench coat, grabbed the handle of my suitcase, and walked out the front door, leaving the keys on the entryway table. The lock clicked shut with a hollow final sound. The moment I stepped onto the Brooklyn pavement, the freezing November rain hit me like a wall. The wind howled through the concrete canyons of the city, instantly soaking my hair and chilling me to the bone. I stood on the edge of the curb, under a flickering street lamp, shivering violently, as I desperately waved my free hand, praying for an empty yellow cab to pass by. Minutes bled into each other. No cabs, only the relentless icy downpour. Just as my knees began to shake, a pair of blinding LED headlights cut through the darkness. The vehicle did not just pass, it swerved sharply toward the curb tires hissing against the wet asphalt and braked aggressively right in front of me. It was a massive, sleek, black Lincoln Navigator. I took a cautious step back, clutching my suitcase to my chest, my Omega instincts flaring with sudden anxiety. The heavily tinted rear window hummed as it slowly rolled down. The scent that drifted out was not the metallic smell of the city rain, but the sophisticated, overpowering aroma of Chanel No. 5 mixed with the absolute unquestionable dominance of a high-tier Alpha. Sitting in the back seat, illuminated by the soft leather interior lights, was Lady Eleanor Vance, Hunter's mother, the ruthless billionaire matriarch of the Vance real estate empire. Her sharp, calculating eyes locked onto my soaked, pathetic form. She did not look at me with pity, she looked at me with cold, tactical precision. I braced myself. She had never approved of me. I fully expected her to hand me a blank check right then and there, ordering me to disappear from her son's life forever. Instead, Eleanor leaned forward, her red lips curling into a sharp, dangerous smile. "Get in, boy," she commanded, her voice cutting through the storm like a steel blade. "You are shivering, and honestly, it is pathetic." I blinked rain dripping from my eyelashes. "Mrs. Vance, I said get in." She interrupted, pushing the heavy door open. "You are carrying my grandchild Oliver. I refuse to let a Vance heir catch a cold on a dirty Brooklyn sidewalk. Besides," her eyes glinted with a terrifying, thrilling kind of malice, "let me show you how we deal with terrible men in this country. And my son is currently at the top of that list." My heart pounded against my ribs. I looked back at the dark, looming apartment building, then back at the open door of the Navigator. Taking a deep breath, I hoisted my suitcase and climbed into the warm, luxurious back seat. The heavy door slammed shut instantly, cutting off the sound of the rain. As the SUV peeled away from the curb, speeding off toward the glittering skyline of Manhattan and the grand estates of the Hamptons beyond, I knew I was not just running away. I was going to war. And I had just allied myself with the most dangerous general in the city. The rhythmic crashing of the Atlantic Ocean against the shoreline was a stark contrast to the relentless sirens and screaming traffic of Brooklyn. I woke up enveloped in 1,000 thread-count Egyptian cotton sheets, sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a guest suite that was easily 3 times the size of the apartment I had shared with Hunter. It had been 4 days since the rainy night I left. 4 days of living in Lady Eleanor's sprawling fortress-like estate in the Hamptons. My mornings here did not start with the smell of stale beer and cold loneliness. They began with a top-tier private physician checking my vitals, followed by a chef preparing meals specifically tailored for Omega prenatal nutrition. Eleanor was a terrifying woman in the boardroom, but here she orchestrated my care with military precision. She never coddled me with false pity. Instead, she treated my pregnancy like a highly valued corporate merger that required the utmost protection. "Eat the salmon, Oliver," Eleanor commanded, sweeping into the sunroom where I was having lunch. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored cream suit, holding an iPad. Omega-3s are essential for my grandson's brain development. Lord knows he might have inherited his father's thick skull, so we need to compensate early. I offered a small grateful smile and took a bite. "Thank you, Eleanor, for everything." She waved a dismissive manicured hand. "Nonsense. You're carrying a Vance. And more importantly, you have a backbone. I respect that." Before I could reply, a jarring metallic crash echoed from the front of the estate, followed immediately by the blaring of the perimeter security alarms. My heart leaped into my throat, my hand instantly flying to my stomach. Eleanor did not even flinch. She simply tapped the screen of her iPad, pulling up the live feed from the security cameras. A dark smirk played on her red lips. Well, it took the idiot exactly 96 hours to track you down," she mused, turning the screen toward me. There, on the high-definition display, was Hunter's beloved vintage Ford Bronco. It was crumpled spectacularly against the massive, reinforced wrought iron gates of the estate. Smoke billowed from the hood. Is he okay?" I gasped, the dormant bond mark on my neck giving a phantom twinge. Despite everything, the instinct to worry about my Alpha flared up. Yeah, he is fine. Those gates are designed to withstand a military assault, and that truck is built like a tank," Eleanor said dryly. He knew my armed guards would never let him through the front door, so he decided to play the tragic victim to get inside. How dramatic. "Let us go collect the trash, shall we?" 10 minutes later, we were standing in the estate's private medical wing. Hunter was lying on a crisp white hospital bed, a pristine bandage wrapped around his forehead. He looked paler than usual, his dark hair messy, his strong jaw tense. When his eyelids fluttered open, his storm gray eyes darted around the room before landing on me. For a split second, I saw raw, desperate relief flash in his gaze, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced by a mask of perfect blank confusion. Where am I?" Hunter murmured, his voice appropriately weak and raspy. He blinked slowly, looking from me to his mother. "Who are you people? Why does my head hurt?" My breath hitched. Amnesia. The crash had given him amnesia. A wave of genuine panic washed over me. He did not remember me. He did not remember the baby. But before my tears could even form, Eleanor's private physician, Dr. Sterling, stepped out of the shadows and silently handed Eleanor a medical tablet. Eleanor glanced at it, then subtly angled it so I could see. CT scan clear, vitals normal, neurological response 100%. Diagnosis, superficial laceration, patient is fully coherent. He was faking it. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water, instantly freezing my tears. Hunter was not brain damaged. He was just a coward. He was too terrified to face my anger, too ashamed to apologize like a real man. So he was hiding behind a soap opera trope. I looked at Eleanor. She raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a silent challenge. "Are you going to let him get away with this?" A strange, empowering warmth blossomed in my chest, replacing the familiar ache of rejection. He wanted to play pretend fine. I would give him the role of a lifetime. "Oh, you poor thing," I said, stepping forward. I made sure to pitch my voice into a tone of sweet, patronizing concern. "You hit your head very hard. You really don't remember who I am," I said. Hunter shook his head, looking up at me with wide, innocent puppy dog eyes. "I'm sorry, should I? Are you my friend?" "Friend." I let out a light, breathy laugh. "No, sweetie, I am your boss." Hunter's eye twitched slightly. "My boss?" "Exactly," Eleanor chimed in, her voice smooth as silk. "You are our live and help. You had a terrible accident while cleaning the gutters. It is a tragedy, really, but since you are so dedicated to your job, Oliver here has graciously decided not to fire you." I pulled a sleek leather binder from the medical counter, something Eleanor and her legal team had jokingly drafted for me just yesterday, and placed it on Hunter's lap. "This is your employment contract," I explained, tapping the thick stack of paper. "Since your memory is gone, we need you to review and sign it again, just to be safe." Hunter stared at the document. I could practically see the gears grinding behind his eyes as he read the bold heading, "The Omega Alpha Household Service Agreement." Clause 12. I read aloud, crossing my arms over my chest. "The employee must strictly control his pheromones. He is only permitted to release the scent of mint when the employer is feeling stressed." Clause 24. The employee is responsible for a daily 30-minute foot massage for the pregnant employer. Oh, and my personal favorite, Clause 45. The employee must sing country music to the unborn fetus every night at 8 o'clock. Hunter swallowed hard. His fingers gripped the edges of the binder tightly enough to turn his knuckles white. He knew he was trapped. If he refused, he would have to drop the act, admit he was lying, and face my wrath. If he signed, the heir to the Vance empire would officially become my indentured servant. He looked at me. I stared back at my blue eyes, cold and uncompromising. Slowly, agonizingly, Hunter picked up the Mont Blanc pen resting on the bedside table. With a stiff, defeated motion, he scrawled his signature at the bottom of the page. "Welcome back to the staff, Hunter." I smiled, snatching the contract away. "Your shift starts at 5 a.m. I like my bagels toasted, not burned." As I walked out of the room with Eleanor leaving the amnesiac Alpha staring blankly at the ceiling, a genuine, joyful laugh escaped my lips for the first time in months. The war had officially begun. The first 2 weeks of Hunter Vance's official employment were, without exaggeration, the most profoundly entertaining days of my life. If anyone had told me a month ago that I would be sitting on a shaded veranda in the Hamptons, sipping a meticulously crafted mocktail while watching the billionaire heir to a real estate empire wrestle with a gas-powered lawnmower, I would have checked them into a psychiatric ward. But there he was. Hunter was dressed in a pair of faded denim overalls that Eleanor had deliberately sourced from a thrift store. The late morning sun beat down mercilessly on his broad shoulders as he pushed the heavy mower back and forth across 3 acres of pristine lawn. Every time he paused to wipe the sweat from his brow, glaring murderous daggers at the grass, I took a very slow, very deliberate sip of my drink. He was fully committed to the bit. He had to be. Breaking character meant admitting defeat, and Hunter Vance's toxic alpha pride would never allow him to surrender to an omega he had deemed a mistake. Of course, his amnesia act was full of holes. I knew he was not entirely disconnected from his empire. One afternoon, I walked past the walk-in pantry and heard aggressive hushed whispering coming from behind the door. Peeking through the crack, I saw the amnesiac yard boy huddled in the dark between jars of organic peach preserves, aggressively firing a mid-level manager over a covert Zoom call on his phone. I simply smirked, locked the pantry door from the outside, and left him in there for 2 hours until Eleanor accidentally let him out. However, by the 3rd week, the game shifted. The universe, it seemed, had decided that my petty punishments were not quite enough. It started on a Tuesday morning. I woke up at 7 o'clock, automatically bracing myself for the crippling wave of morning sickness that usually hit me the moment my feet touched the floor. But as I sat up, I realized my stomach felt completely settled. In fact, I felt fantastic. I had a sudden ravenous craving for a stack of buttermilk pancakes. As I walked down the grand mahogany hallway toward the kitchen, a violent, unmistakable sound echoed from the servants' bathroom near the laundry wing. Retching. Loud, miserable retching. Curiosity piqued, I quietly pushed the door open. Hunter was on his knees, his hands gripping the edges of the toilet bowl so tightly his knuckles were white. He was pale sweating and heaving up what looked like the remnants of his breakfast. Oh dear. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Did the cook's oatmeal disagree with you, Hunter? He groaned, resting his forehead against the cool porcelain. I don't know what is wrong with me. I feel like I'm dying. I felt a sudden familiar twinge on the bond mark at the base of my neck. Realization dawned on me so sudden and hilarious that I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop from bursting into laughter. Cuvade syndrome, sympathy pregnancy. Because we were bonded, and because his alpha instincts were currently wrapped in a hurricane of guilt, stress, and forced proximity, his body was biologically mirroring my pregnancy symptoms. While I was suddenly glowing and eating like a horse, the great Hunter Vance was experiencing the full, unadulterated horrors of the first trimester. Well, drink some ginger ale and get back to work, I said breezily, turning on my heel. The rose bushes are not going to prune themselves. The sympathy pregnancy only escalated from there. The mighty alpha who used to scoff at weakness was suddenly a victim of his own biology. He became painfully sensitive to smells. When Eleanor purposely wore her strongest Chanel perfume to the dining room, Hunter had to excuse himself, turning a fascinating shade of green before sprinting to the nearest bathroom. But the absolute peak of his humiliation happened a few nights later. I woke up around 2 a.m. feeling parched. I padded softly down the stairs to the main kitchen to get a glass of water. When I pushed the swinging door open, I froze. The refrigerator door was wide open, casting a pale, cold light across the dark marble floor. Sitting cross-legged in front of it was Hunter. He was holding a large jar of kosher dill pickles in one hand and a jar of chunky peanut butter in the other. I watched in stunned silence as he dipped a thick, juicy pickle directly into the peanut butter, brought it to his mouth, and took a massive, desperate bite. He chewed with his eyes closed, looking as if he had just tasted a Michelin star masterpiece. "What on earth are you doing?" I asked, flipping on the kitchen lights. Hunter flinched violently, nearly dropping the jars. His storm gray eyes went wide, staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. He had peanut butter smeared on the corner of his mouth. I was hungry," he stammered frantically, trying to wipe his face with the back of his hand. My brain, my amnesia, makes me crave weird things. About pickles and peanut butter. I raised an eyebrow, walking over to pour my water. "Careful, Hunter. If I did not know any better, I would say you were the one carrying a child." He swallowed hard, looking utterly pathetic, sitting on the floor. For a fleeting second, the alpha mask slipped entirely, and he just looked terribly tired. Can you just not tell my mother about this, please?" I stared down at him. A month ago, this man had shattered my heart into a million pieces. Now he was begging me to keep his bizarre midnight cravings a secret. "Clean up your mess, employee," I said softly and walked out. Despite the comedy of his suffering, a quiet, confusing shift began to take root in my chest. Later that week, I was sitting on the sofa, my feet aching terribly after a long walk on the beach. Right on schedule as dictated by clause 24 of his contract, Hunter walked in carrying a basin of warm water infused with Epsom salts and lavender. He knelt before me, rolling up the sleeves of his simple white shirt. As he reached out to gently lift my foot into the water, I noticed his hands. The hands that used to perfectly knot silk ties and hold crystal bourbon glasses were now rough. They were covered in fresh calluses, a few nasty scratches from the rose bushes, and a bandage on his thumb. He looked exhausted. His face was paler than usual due to the relentless morning sickness, and dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. Yet, as his rough, blistered thumbs began to methodically massage the arches of my aching feet, his touch was impossibly gentle. It was not the rushed, begrudging touch of someone being forced into labor. It was careful, deliberate. I looked down at his bowed head, his dark hair falling over his forehead. He had not complained once. Not about the humiliating tasks, not about the vomiting, not about the physical pain. I rested a hand protectively over the small bump of my stomach, my heart beating a strange, uneven rhythm. I had designed this contract to punish him to break his ego. But looking at him now, gently washing my feet, in the quiet of the evening, a terrifying question crept into my mind. Was he just a stubborn alpha refusing to lose a game of chicken, or was the act slowly ceasing to be an act? The fourth week of the Amnesia era brought a sharp drop in the coastal temperature and a completely unexpected visitor to the estate. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was lounging in the grand library enveloped in an oversized cashmere blanket, flipping through a magazine while savoring a cup of chamomile tea. In the adjacent grand foyer, the heir to the Vance empire was currently on his hands and knees. Hunter was wearing a hideous yellow rubber apron over his clothes, meticulously scrubbing the baseboards with a toothbrush under the watchful, terrifying eye of Eleanor's head housekeeper. I was just about to ask him to fetch me a slice of lemon cake when the abrasive roar of a V8 engine shattered the tranquility of the estate. Tires screeched on the gravel driveway, followed by the frantic slamming of a car door. The heavy mahogany double doors of the foyer burst open, bypassing the security protocols, entirely a perk only granted to high society elites who were foolish enough to think they own the world. In strode Ashton and Omega from one of Manhattan's oldest banking families. He was Hunter's former almost fiancé, a stunningly beautiful socialite with platinum blonde hair, a wardrobe that cost more than a small island, and a personality as toxic as nuclear waste. He was the exact type of Omega Hunter's Wall Street friends had always thought he should end up with decorative, compliant, and ruthless in social climbing. Hunter, oh my God, Hunter, what have they done to you? Ashton shrieked. His voice echoed off the vaulted ceilings like a dying siren. He rushed across the foyer, his expensive Louboutin heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. He completely ignored me sitting in the library and threw himself dramatically toward the man scrubbing the baseboards. Hunter froze. He looked up the yellow rubber apron, clashing horribly with his storm gray eyes. Hunter, darling, I heard the rumors, but I could not believe it, Ashton wailed, reaching out to cup Hunter's face. Amnesia trapped in your mother's house like a prisoner, working as a maid. It is a human rights violation. Come with me. I am taking you back to the city right now. I slowly lowered my magazine, my heart suddenly beating a little faster. This was the ultimate test. Ashton was gorgeous, wealthy, and represented the exact life of unburdened freedom Hunter had claimed he wanted. With his memory gone, this was his perfect excuse to drop the mop, take Ashton's hand, and escape my bizarre punishment. I held my breath, waiting for the alpha to break character. Instead, Hunter flinched backward as if Ashton's manicured hands were coated in acid. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing the heavy wet mop from the nearby bucket and held it out defensively like a medieval broadsword. Whoa, back off, lady! Hunter barked, his voice laced with genuine panic. Ashton blinked his perfectly contoured face, falling in shock. Lady Hunter, it's me. It is Ashton we spent last summer in Mykonos. I don't know any Ashton, and I don't know any Mykonos, Hunter shouted, waving the dripping mop menacingly, forcing the socialite to take a hurried step back to save his designer suit. And you are tracking mud all over my freshly polished Carrara marble. Do you have any idea how long it took me to get the shine right? Hunter, please, you are not well. The only thing not well is your manners. Hunter interrupted aggressively. "Now get out of here before I call security. I don't have time for your delusions. I have a very strict schedule. I have to prep the organic turkey soup for my boss, Ollie, by 4 o'clock. And if I am late, he docks my pay." A startling, undignified snort escaped my lips. I clamped a hand over my mouth, shrinking back into the wingback chair, my shoulders shaking with silent, uncontrollable laughter. Ashton stood completely paralyzed, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The great Hunter Vance, the most eligible alpha in New York, was threatening him with dirty mop water to go cook soup for his pregnant boss. Realizing he had entirely lost control of the narrative and his dignity, Ashton spun on his heel, let out a frustrated scream, and stormed out of the house, slamming the doors behind him. The silence that followed was golden. Hunter stood there for a moment, chest heaving, the mop still clutched in his rough hands. He slowly lowered it, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. A warm, radiant feeling blossomed in my chest. He had chosen me. Even in a fake reality, even when offered a golden ticket out, he had fiercely protected our strange, isolated world. For the first time since that rainy night in Brooklyn, I felt a heavy, icy armor around my heart begin to melt. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a real future. But my naive hope was destined to be short-lived. That night, around midnight, I was lying in bed, hovering in that peaceful space between wakefulness and deep sleep. The room was dark, illuminated only by the silver moonlight filtering through the sheer curtains. The door to my suite creaked open softly. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing even. I knew it was Hunter. He had started doing this recently, sneaking in to check the thermostat or leave a fresh glass of water on my nightstand while he thought I was asleep. I felt the mattress dip slightly as he knelt on the plush carpet beside the bed. I waited for him to adjust the blanket or leave the water. Instead, I felt a warm, large hand gently rest over the swell of my stomach, through the thick duvet. It was a touch so tender, so reverent that my breath hitched in my throat. "Hey, little guy," Hunter whispered. His voice was barely a breath, completely devoid of the confused, eager-to-please tone of the amnesiac servant. It was his real voice. Deep, rough, and drowning in sorrow. I'm sorry," he murmured into the darkness, his forehead resting gently against the edge of the mattress near my hip. "I'm so sorry for lying to you and your papa. I remember everything. I remember the night he left. I remember how badly I broke him." My blood ran cold. The warmth in my chest vanished, instantly replaced by a terrifying, suffocating chill. "I'm just a coward," Hunter's voice cracked, sounding like a man on the edge of a cliff. "I'm terrified. If I tell him the truth, if I drop this act and admit I'm fully conscious of what a monster I was, he will send me away. He will look at me with those cold eyes and throw me out of your lives forever, and I can't survive that. I just can't." He stayed there for another minute, softly stroking my covered stomach, before silently rising and slipping out of the room like a ghost. I lay frozen in the dark, my heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. He was lying. It was all a calculated, manipulative lie. The mop, the gardening, the foot rubs, it was not a punishment he was enduring. It was a shield he was hiding behind. He was still the same man who prioritized his own safety and control over honesty. The ghost of the past had returned, dragging all my insecurities with it. I curled onto my side, wrapping my arms protectively around my stomach as tears pricked the corners of my eyes. The war was not over. In fact, the most painful battle was just about to begin. The silence in the Hamptons estate had become louder than any argument. After that night in my bedroom, when I had realized Hunter's amnesia was just a cowardly shield, I could not look at him the same way. I stopped asking for the foot massages. I stopped letting him handle my pregnancy checkups. I retreated into myself, wrapping my heart in a layer of frost that felt just as thick as the one I imagined around his own. Eleanor, ever the puppet master, noticed the shift. She did not scold me for it. Instead, she leaned into it. One Tuesday morning, she left a sleek white envelope on the mahogany desk in the library, right where I knew Hunter would see it. Petition for marital dissolution. She didn't say a word, but the message was clear. She was pushing him to the edge. She was testing to see if he would finally step out of the shadows. That evening, the sky turned a bruised, violent purple. A nor'easter, a storm of legendary East Coast fury, began to hammer against the glass walls of the mansion. By midnight, the power flickered and died. The grand estate, usually warm and glowing, was swallowed by a suffocating ink-black darkness. The wind shrieked like a banshee, tearing at the oak trees, and the house began to groan under the sheer pressure of the gale. I was in my suite when the lights went out. I felt a sharp, sudden cramp in my lower abdomen, the kind of pain that made my breath hitch and my hands tremble. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from the storm, but from a sudden sharp fear for the baby. Please not now. Please not yet. Oliver! Hunter's voice came from the doorway. Even in the darkness, I could hear the shift in his tone. The servant was gone. The amnesiac was missing. His voice was laced with a raw, jagged edge of panic. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice shaking as I gripped the side of the bed. Another cramp hit harder this time, and I doubled over, a small cry escaping my lips. Before I could even blink, he was there. He did not use his hesitant servant shuffle. He moved with the predatory grace of an alpha crossing the room in 2 long strides. He knelt beside the bed, his hands finding my arms, his grip firm and grounding. "You are not fine," he growled. The heat radiating from his body was an immediate, intoxicating sensory overload. He was not hiding his pheromones anymore. The room was suddenly thick with the scent of pine winter air and the deep possessive musk of an alpha who had lost all sense of self-preservation. It was a wave of sensory intensity that made my head spin. "The power is out," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the gale outside. "I need to get you to the fireplace in the parlor. It is the only place that is holding any heat." He did not wait for my permission. He scooped me up into his arms, blankets and all. I was heavy burdened by pregnancy and fear, but he carried me as if I weighed nothing. As he moved through the darkened house, I felt his heartbeat thudding against my cheek. It was erratic, frantic. He settled me in front of the massive stone fireplace in the parlor where he had already frantically lit a fire. The orange light flickered, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. He did not leave my side. He did not pretend to be the help. He was on his knees, his hands moving over my stomach, checking for tension, his brows furrowed in a way that had nothing to do with labor and everything to do with pure, unadulterated fear. "Breathe, Oliver. Please just breathe for me," he whispered. His forehead rested against my hip, his breath hitching. "I can't lose you. I can't." I looked down at him, the man who hours ago had been mopping floors and pretending he didn't know the difference between a vacuum and a wine decanter. His facade had completely crumbled, leaving behind a man who looked like he had been shattered into 1,000 pieces and was desperately trying to glue himself back together. The pain in my stomach began to subside, leaving me exhausted, but my mind was wide awake. The storm roared outside, an apocalyptic symphony of wind and rain, but inside the parlor it was stiflingly quiet. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and caught a lock of his dark hair. I tugged it gently, forcing him to look up at me. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale, and for the first time in months, I saw the hunter I had actually married. Not the billionaire, not the servant, but the man underneath it all. "The act," I whispered, my voice raspy. "It is over, isn't it?" He froze. His pupils dilated, the alpha instinct warring with the wreckage of his pride. He did not pull away. He did not run. He just looked at me, and in his gaze, I saw the truth. It was a look of such profound, agonizing sorrow that it made my own chest ache. "It is not an act anymore, Oliver," he replied, his voice breaking, sounding like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. "I'm not playing a game. I am so tired of lying." I felt the last of my defenses slip away, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. We were at the precipice, and I knew that whatever happened next, whether it was forgiveness or the final end, there was no going back to the lies. The orange glow of the fireplace illuminated the absolute wreckage of Hunter Vance, the billionaire alpha, a man who commanded boardrooms and terrified rivals, slowly dropped to his knees on the plush Persian rug. He did not look like a master of the universe anymore. He looked like a starving man begging for a single drop of water. I was terrified. Oliver Hunter's voice was a ragged, broken whisper. He looked up at me, his storm gray eyes swimming with tears he no longer bothered to hide. My whole life, I watched my father treat my mother like an acquisition. I watched him use his alpha authority to crush anyone who loved him. I swore I would never be tied down because I was so desperately afraid that I had his toxic blood in my veins, that if I took a mate, I would eventually break them. He reached out, his trembling hands hovering just inches from my knees, too afraid to touch me without permission. When the bond snapped into place between us, I panicked. He continued to tear, finally spilling over his thick lashes. You were so good, so pure, and I pushed you away because caring about you meant giving you the power to destroy me. I said those horrific things to my friends because I was trying to convince myself I didn't care, but I did. I loved you even then, and it scared me to death. I stared down at him, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. And the amnesia, I asked, my voice barely holding together. Hunter closed his eyes, a shudder racking his broad shoulders. Cowardice, pure cowardice. When I crashed the truck, I saw a way out, a way to be near you without facing your hatred. But Oliver, these past months, scrubbing the floors, making your tea, rubbing your feet, it was not a punishment. It was the happiest I have ever been. I wasn't the Vance heir. I didn't have to be ruthless. I was just yours. I finally learned how to take care of you. Before I could process the magnitude of his confession, the heavy oak doors of the parlor swung open. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, followed by the unmistakable click of designer heels. Lady Eleanor stepped into the firelight, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, looking entirely unbothered by the apocalyptic blizzard outside. Well, it took a 50 claws contract to mop and 3 months of morning sickness, but we finally broke the toxic conditioning of 3 generations of Vance men, Eleanor said dryly, lowering the flashlight. Hunter spun around, staring at his mother in shock. You knew. Of course I knew, you absolute idiot. Eleanor sneered elegantly. Dr. Sterling works for me. I knew your brain was perfectly fine the moment you woke up. I helped Oliver draft that ridiculous contract because I knew you needed your ego crushed into a fine powder before you could ever be a decent husband. You needed to learn humility, and clearly the janitorial arts suited you. Hunter looked back and forth between us, the realization dawning on him that he had been entirely outplayed by his Omega and his mother. But instead of anger, a deep, breathless sound of relief escaped his chest. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. I looked at the man trembling on the floor. The anger that had sustained me for months suddenly felt incredibly heavy. I was tired of fighting. I took a deep breath, preparing to speak, to tell him that words were cheap and he would have to prove his devotion every single day for the rest of his life. But the words never left my mouth. A sharp, agonizing pain ripped through my lower back so intense that it stole my breath completely. I gasped, my hands flying to my stomach. A second later, I felt a sudden gush of warm liquid soak through my sweatpants. Oliver! Hunter's head snapped up, his alpha instincts flaring instantly. My I choked out a wave of blinding panic washing over me. It broke. It is too early, Hunter. It is too early. The parlor erupted into controlled chaos. The amnesiac servant vanished, entirely replaced by a fiercely focused protective mate. Hunter was on his feet in a fraction of a second. He scooped me into his arms, holding me tightly against his chest. Get the armored SUV now. Eleanor barked into her emergency radio, her aristocratic calm finally cracking. Tell the security detail to attach the snowplow to the lead truck. We are going to Manhattan Central Hospital if we have to drive over frozen lakes to get there. The next 2 hours were a blur of screaming wind, agonizing contractions, and sheer terror. I lay across the back seat of the massive Lincoln Navigator, my head resting in Hunter's lap. The SUV barreled through the treacherous snow-covered highways, flanked by Eleanor's security detail, forcibly clearing the road. Every time a contraction hit, I screamed, my nails digging ruthlessly into Hunter's forearms, drawing blood. He did not flinch. He did not care about the pain. He hovered over me, his face pale with terror, continuously bathing the cramped space in a thick, overwhelming cloud of soothing mint pheromones. I'm right here, Ollie. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere, Hunter chanted over and over, his tears falling freely onto my cheeks. He pressed kisses to my sweaty forehead, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry. I love you. Please just hold on for me. I'm never leaving you again. By the time we crashed through the emergency room doors of Manhattan Central, the world had faded into a haze of sterile white lights and medical shouting. As they rushed my stretcher down the glaring hallways, I reached out blindly. A large, rough hand, calloused from hours of gardening and holding a mop, instantly gripped mine, anchoring me to the earth as the final, absolute battle began. The golden morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Tribeca penthouse, scattering warm light across the wide plank oak floors. It was a stark, beautiful contrast to the freezing, rain-soaked Brooklyn street I had stood on exactly 1 year ago. I stood in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting the silver cuffs of my tailored Tom Ford suit. At 24, the timid, anxious Omega, who used to hide in the bedroom while the alphas talked business, was completely gone. In his place was the newly appointed vice president of creative design for the Vance real estate empire. It was a position Eleanor had ruthlessly, relentlessly trained me for, and one I had earned with every ounce of my sweat and vision. I picked up my leather briefcase, taking a deep, grounding breath. The penthouse smelled of fresh espresso caramelized apples and the warm, comforting undercurrent of mint. Following the scent, I walked into the sprawling marble kitchen. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my chest, simply allowing myself to take in the sight before me. Hunter Vance, the formidable billionaire CEO, whose name alone made Wall Street executives tremble, was standing at the custom stove. He was wearing perfectly pressed charcoal suit trousers, a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and a ridiculous flour-dusted floral apron. Strapped firmly to his broad chest in a high-end baby carrier was a babbling 6-month-old infant. Asher had his father's storm gray eyes and a tuft of unruly dark hair, but the moment he saw me, he offered a wide, gummy smile that was entirely mine. "Dada," Asher squealed, waving a chubby fist in the air. Hunter turned around, a spatula in his hand and a smudge of pancake batter on his cheek. His eyes lit up the moment they locked onto mine. "Morning, boss," he said, his voice a low, happy rumble. He walked over, pressing a soft, batter-tasting kiss to my lips before leaning down so Asher could grab a fistful of my suit jacket. "Morning, employee, Vance." I teased, reaching out to wipe the flour off his strong jawline. "I see you are multitasking today. Are you sure you have time to make breakfast? Don't you have the board meeting for the new Chicago acquisition at 10? "I do," Hunter smiled skillfully, flipping a pancake onto a porcelain plate. "But the Chicago acquisition can wait 10 minutes. My primary job is making sure the VP of design eats his carbs before a long day of dominating the architectural world. Besides, Asher was helping me prep." "Ah, yes. I can see his contribution on the floor." I laughed, pointing to a dropped spoonful of applesauce near the island. Before Hunter could grab a towel, the private elevator at the end of the hall chimed smoothly. The silver doors parted, and Lady Eleanor stepped out. She was wearing an impeccable Chanel tweed suit, her silver hair styled flawlessly, holding an absurdly expensive custom-made platinum rattle. I smelled domesticity from the lobby. "It is revoltingly sweet," Eleanor announced, marching into the kitchen. She bypassed Hunter completely and went straight for Asher, her sharp features instantly melting into an expression of utter devotion. "Hello, my perfect grandson. Are you ready to inherit the earth? Mother, you can't give a 6-month-old a platinum rattle. It is too heavy." Hunter sighed, though there was a fond smile playing on his lips. "Nonsense. He needs to build his upper body strength to carry this family's legacy." Eleanor sniffed dismissively. She turned her calculating gaze to me, looking me up and down. "The suit is excellent, Oliver. You look like a shark. Eat that board of directors alive today." I learned from the best Eleanor. I smiled, accepting a plate of warm pancakes from Hunter. As I ate, I watched my husband. The alpha, who used to view a mate as a biological trap, was now carefully spooning pureed carrots into our son's mouth, making ridiculous airplane noises and laughing when Asher grabbed his nose. There was no pretense anymore. The amnesia was a running joke, a memory of the drastic measures it took to strip away his toxic pride. Hunter caught me staring. He handed Asher over to a very willing Eleanor, wiped his hands on a kitchen towel, and walked over to me. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me gently against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, burying his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling my scent deeply. "I'm just thinking about our contract," I whispered, resting my hands on his broad shoulders. "It officially expires next week. Technically, you don't have to be my indentured servant anymore. You are a free man." Hunter pulled back slightly, looking down at me. The storm gray of his eyes was entirely clear, filled with a profound, unshakable devotion. He reached up his thumb, gently tracing the silver bond mark on my neck, a mark that no longer represented a cage, but an anchor. "I don't want freedom," Hunter said fiercely, his voice vibrating with absolute certainty. "If freedom means a life without you, without Asher, then I don't want it. I will sign 100 more contracts. I will scrub floors. I will garden. I will eat pickles with peanut butter until the end of time. I am yours, Oliver. In every lifetime, I am yours." My breath hitched. Even after a year, the raw honesty in his voice had the power to stop my heart. I pulled his face down, capturing his lips in a kiss that tasted of espresso morning sunlight and home. "Good," I whispered against his mouth, a wicked little smile playing on my lips. "Because Clause 45 still stands. I expect a country music lullaby tonight at 8 o'clock. Hunter groaned, resting his forehead against mine. "Have mercy, boss. My vocal cords are still recovering from last night's rendition of Dolly Parton." "No mercy," I laughed, grabbing my briefcase. I kissed my son's soft cheeks, said goodbye to Eleanor, and headed toward the elevator. As the silver doors began to close, I looked back one last time. Hunter was standing in the sunlit kitchen, holding our son, smiling at me with a love so bright it could rival the New York skyline. I had once believed that love was a trap, but looking at the family I had built, the empire I was about to walk into, and the alpha who had learned how to kneel so he could properly hold me up, I finally understood the truth. True freedom was not about running away from your ties. It was about finding the exact right person and willingly, joyfully chaining your soul to theirs.